Good evening. Welcome to the Loft Literary Center. I'm Jared Santek, Program Director at the Loft, and we're very happy to have you with us this evening as we welcome our McKnight Artist Fellowship Judge, Pam Houston. A few announcements before we begin tonight's event. If out of respect for tonight's reader and other audience members, if you would silence your cell phones, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, as you saw, as you were coming into the hall, tonight's event is being recorded on video and audio recording. So if you do have issues with that, you can sit out of the camera range if you don't want to be caught on video. We are very happy to have you here for our reading with Pam Houston, who served as judge for the 2011 McKnight Artist Fellowships for Writers, Loft Awards in Creative Prose. We will have a brief question and answer period following the reading, and a reception and book signing will follow that out in the Commons. So I hope that you can stay around and talk with our guest artist and the fellows that she's selected for this award. Major Zing Quinn is here selling books tonight, and Pam will be happy to sign those. A few events coming up here at the Loft to let you know about. Our winter-spring online classes are now available for registration. If you register before January 1st, you receive a 15% early bird discount. The coming week has a number of great events here. Poet Lee Herrick will be reading on Wednesday. That is a co-sponsored event with Adoptees Have Answers and Adopted Korean Connection. Next Friday, this year's Mentor Series in Poetry and Creative Prose reading series begins with mentor Dinty Moore and program participants Rebecca Dosh Brown and Diana Zinn. A week from tonight, one of the Loft's founding forces, Jill Breckenridge, reads from her memoir, and next Sunday, Second Story, the Loft's reading series for children's and young adult writers, presents Kelly Barnhill and Ann Ursu. So a lot of great stuff coming up, and you can find details on all these events and classes by visiting our website. Tonight's reading is a literary punch eligible event. So if you have your punch card with you, be sure to stop at the book sale table, and Erin will be happy to punch you. You earn 1 punch for attending, and 2 if you buy one of Pam's books. So reason to buy. And if you don't have a card, Erin will be happy to provide you with one and punch you appropriately depending on your purchases. I want to take this opportunity to thank our Loft members who make events like this and all of the Loft's work possible. A contribution of any amount makes you a member, and you can become a sustaining member for as little as $5 a month. As a nonprofit organization, we appreciate any support you can give your literary community. And if you are interested in joining, you can talk to me or another Loft staff person after the event, or pick up a membership form, which is out in the Commons, or go to loft.org/support. For the past 36 years, it has been the mission of the Loft to foster the artistic development of individual writers and an audience for literature. We offer a variety of awards, but none are more coveted than the McKnight Artist Fellowships for Writers, which translates into time and money for the writers selected. 5 $25,000 fellowships are presented annually, 4 that alternate between poetry and creative prose, and 1 award in children's literature, which alternates between writing for children under the age of 8 and ages 8 and older. I want to thank the McKnight Foundation for making this award possible and for all the support they provide to artists in all disciplines throughout Minnesota. About this time last year, Pam received a rather heavy box from the Loft containing the 100 eligible prose manuscripts submitted to the fellowship competition. In my cover letter to her, I told Pam that she had some great reading ahead and some tough decisions to make. On March 1st, I received the following email from Pam. Well, you were exactly right. This is an impressive collection of prose. I did have some very difficult decisions to make, and I read all of my top 8 manuscripts multiple times, trying to make sure of my ordering. I feel pretty confident now, but I'm glad I got such an early start on it, because it has allowed me to live with these finalists for several weeks before I had to make a final decision. And Pam, I just have to say, as an arts administrator, that email contains my favorite words to read or hear. I got an early start on it. So. The writers whose work Pam lived with for all those weeks and who were awarded the fellowships are John Colburn, Ethan Rutherford, and Dominic Saucedo of Minneapolis, and Jessica Roeder of Duluth. While Pam was living with their work, our judge in children's literature, the editor Arthur Levine, was living with the work of 36 very talented writers for children, writers for children over the age of 8, not writers over 8 years old. From those, he had to choose just one for the fellowship, and that writer is Heather Bauman of St. Paul. Most of our fellows are here tonight, and I would like to ask them to stand for a round of applause. Unfortunately, due to a long-standing commitment, John Colburn was unable to join us this evening, but you will have an opportunity to hear all 5 of these fellows read on Saturday, March 24th. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest reader tonight. Several years ago, a writer I worked with in one of the programs here sent me a gift, a copy of Pam Houston's short story collection, Waltzing the Cat. I think you'll enjoy this, his note said, and he was quite right. I very much enjoyed it. And the gift was a never-ending one. It led me to her other story collection, Cowboys Are My Weakness, her novel Sighthound, and her nonfiction book, A Little Bit More About Me. Early in 2012, W.W. Norton will publish her new novel, Contents May Have Shifted. And I hope early is really early because I can't wait to read that novel. During this morning's opening remarks to the novel conference, Pam said she used to answer the audience question about how much of her fiction was autobiographical by stating 82%. When she toured for the nonfiction book, she was often introduced with the comment that the audience was about to get 100% Pam. But as Pam pointed out, it was still about 82%. That got me thinking, as would happen at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning when you're at work, about wine. I had done a wine tasting tour this summer, and while I enjoyed the single varietals, the Zinfandels and stuff, the best tasting wines were the ones that were 40% Grenache, 30% Syrah, and a combination of 30% of grapes I'd never heard of before. So it occurred to me that that's what all good prose or all good writing is. It's 60% this, 30% that, 10% who knows. The blend allows for complexities and subtleties you won't otherwise find, and the product satisfies deeply, and the memory of it stays with you long after the glass is empty and the book has been closed. Such is the work of tonight's reader. Please welcome Pam Houston.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, finalists, Dominic, Jessica, Ethan, and John. I'm very pleased to meet you all, and I trust and believe you have wonderful careers ahead of you. It was such a pleasure reading your work, and generally speaking, reading the work of, the manuscripts were incredibly impressive, that there could be that much good work in one state. It was great. So I feel very honored to have judged that contest and also to be here. This book, here it is, it's a galley, so it's almost a book. It will be out on February 6th. And it's called Contents May Have Shifted. It began when I was invited to the Wisconsin Book Festival in Madison, and I was asked to participate in an evening called Unveiled. And the assignment was to read something, 4 of us or 5 of us were asked to read something that was completely untested, untried for that evening. And I took the assignment so seriously I didn't start writing till I was on the plane to Wisconsin. And I wrote sort of feverishly for about 48 hours and got something, did something that I tell my students to do when they get stuck, which is just sit and think about things that you've experienced lately that have arrested your attention, that have glimmered at you. And so I did that, and I got these 12 little glimmers. And I felt pretty good about it, and I went back and I looked at the email to make sure I had done everything I was supposed to do. I had about 3 hours left before the reading. And it said, the only caveat is that you have to mention the state of Wisconsin. So I was like, oh. So I had not mentioned the state of Wisconsin. It was one of the first times I'd ever been in Wisconsin. So I just went down to the street corner and waited for something to happen. And then it did, and then I went upstairs and I wrote about it. And so that was Wisconsin. So I was true to my method. And I read it that night, and it came off pretty well, considering what a last-minute freak I am. And Richard Bausch was there, and he's a writer I admire a lot. And he said, write 100 of those, and it's your next book. And I think in 12, so I thought, well, no, 144. Not 100, but 6 years later, here we are. Here we are with 144 of those. And I'm going to read around in the book a little. They are, there's a rough chronology to the book, but they're not in order. So the idea being, the book should create the illusion that I could read any ones in any order and it would work out. That, of course, isn't true. But that's how it's supposed to feel when you're reading it. So I've read from this book now for a little while, and I try a different combination every night. So we'll see how this goes. The very short chapters, the 144 very short chapters, are grouped into groups of 12. They're each titled with the place that they occur. And then in between each group of 12, there's a story that takes place no place, on an airplane. So I'm going to start with one of the airplane stories. And the airplane stories are titled with the flight number. So this is DL, or Delta 55. The plane is gradually but perceptibly descending. It is barely light outside, and we aren't due at Orly until nearly noon. There is an odd ticking noise coming from the wing outside my window. I come fully awake and realize we are listing strenuously to the right. I glance at my seatmate on the aisle. Her name is Rebecca. She is a 26-year-old bank teller from Cincinnati who has never flown before, who has saved for 5 years to take her dream trip to Paris. I spent most of dinner telling her how much safer airplanes are than car travel, how the 777 has a minimum of 3 fail-safes on each of its major systems, how even if one of the engines fell clean off the fuselage, it is designed to tumble backwards, up and over the wing, so it doesn't tear the wing from the plane. Now, in spite of all my reassurances, we seem to be heading shoulder first into the North Atlantic. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot says, as many of you are probably aware, we are descending, preparing to make an unscheduled landing into Reykjavik, Iceland. Approximately 35 minutes ago, we experienced an explosion in our number 2 engine, and that engine is now inoperable. The ticking sound you hear is the wind running through it, spinning the blades backwards, much like a household fan. You can probably also tell that we are tacking toward Iceland, much as we would in a sailboat, as our current engine configuration will not give us full power in a straight line. Now Rebecca is awake and looking at me wild-eyed. The man likes a metaphor, I say, and offer a small smile. The light out the window has strengthened, and I can see whitecaps on an angry gray sea. I always kind of wanted to go to Iceland, I say, but by now Rebecca is no longer looking at me. She has her eyes closed tightly, has given herself, I imagine, to prayer. We will be landing in approximately 15 minutes, the captain says. Please give your undivided attention to the flight attendants as they instruct you in landing in the brace position. I like that he did not say crash. I like that he is a language guy. The ocean is getting quite a bit closer, no sign of Iceland out my window, and I hope that Reykjavik Airport does not turn out to be a metaphor for fucked. Just when it seems that our wheels have to be skimming the water, land and runway lights appear, and then more of them. So many lights, it is hard to count them. A sea of spinning red and blue. Every ambulance and fire truck in Iceland seems to have come out to greet us. Holy shit, I say, just before the wheels hit the foam, and the foam splashes up and covers all the windows, throwing the cabin in a half light, exactly like waking up in a tent after a snowstorm, and then everyone is cheering as the plane glides to a jerky, sticky stop. Much later, in an upstairs blank space of terminal, as we are being fed rice with some kind of chickeny goo all over it by something resembling the Icelandic Red Cross, the crew tells us the reason for the emergency equipment. When the number 2 engine exploded, it spit jet fuel all over the fuselage. We were a Molotov cocktail hurtling through space, is the way the literary pilot puts it. There was no way to be certain that the friction of the tires on the runway wouldn't make a spark and ignite us, turn us into a 90-mile-per-hour ball of flame. Okay, this is number 11. This is Madison, Wisconsin. This is the one I added that day. More or less. Saturday morning, middle of October, good strong coffee from Michelangelo's. Last night, Ethan sang "You Can Close Your Eyes" to my voicemail, and I did, and for the first time this week, slept for 6 hours straight. This morning on State Street, a little blonde girl, maybe 3, threw the kind of temper tantrum we'd all like to throw, long and loud and almost entirely artificial. Jessica, her mother said in a perfectly reasonable tone, "I'm going to have to ask you for your complete cooperation." Fenton the human called to say he has come up with the perfect book for us to write together. Pam and Fenton's Tales of Failed Love and Romance. Chapter 1, mine, called I Can't Believe I Slept with a Politician, followed by Chapter 2, his I Can't Believe I Slept with a Priest. Everything I know about Wisconsin can fit into one paragraph. It is the home of the Butterburger. It is the state where, on the day his father died, Brett Favre had the game of his life. On Thursday, I gave my class this assignment: write your own suicide note. There was half a beat where they all looked at me and then at each other. "No problem," Noah said. "I'll just go to my computer and call one up." This is Luang, Prabang, Laos. In Luang Prabang, the holiest city in Laos, pastel temples rise out of Mekong River mist, children carry fresh bouquets of frangipani blossoms, and women get up at dawn every morning to stand on street corners and spoon rice into the begging bowls of monks clad in robes of maroon and saffron who walk the streets in a tradition of generosity centuries old. Here, dawn happens at the same time every morning. We are that close to the equator. Life clusters around the temples and the river, where there is always someone bathing, washing clothes, or tending the tiny gardens that spring up from every bank. Zai and I climb wooden stairs to temple after temple and stand before giant golden Buddhas who are reclining, sitting, standing, some of them so tall we only come to their knees. Monks of all ages tend the altars, bringing oranges, incense, silver chalices of water and wine. They tell me to write down something I wish for and leave the scrap of paper among the offerings. I start with "stop hunger" and "make peace." But in the next temple, Zai says, "something for yourself," as if he's been reading over my shoulder. So I write, "speak French fluently." And in the next temple, "more dogs and friends, less work." And in the last one, "for God's sake, Pam, spread it around." Once, on the big island of Hawaii, I got to watch the earth get made. Not just me, hundreds of people. Kilauea was erupting in such a user-friendly way you could get right up next to a new lava flow with only a mile's walking, with no fear of getting acid rain in your hair. I had seen the flowing lava from a distance one time before, seen it pour into the Pacific, sending up enormous clouds of spit and steam, but standing right next to it, even straddling little rivulets of it as it found its way through tiny gullies formed in the drying black glass of the prior day's lava, made the whole thing so intimate it took my breath away. There was a van full of geology students from some Midwestern state lunging around the new lava like gorillas, wielding pickaxes and scooping big metal fingers full of the blackening goo. And I thought about all of those stories I had heard about Pele, tossing, for example, a front end loader into the sea, driver and all, if she did not approve of the location of a construction project. And I imagined these future geologists of America getting home to Kansas with their samples and their hair falling out and their dicks falling off. In the Tam Nhat Lao, Three Elephants restaurant in Luang, Prabang, tourists sit side by side with locals and the humid air seems to be infused with a mist of goodwill. Shy-eyed servers bring chicken curry, banana pancakes, grilled goldfish, dried deer meat, stuffed peppers, noodle soup, meatballs made with fish, spring rolls, stir-fried vegetables, green chili paste. In the late afternoon, a young monk in a silken saffron robe crosses a courtyard paved with ancient cobblestones, steps into a ray of sunlight, and ignites, as if for a moment he has the sun inside him, as if he is the light of the world. This is 59, Tucson, Arizona. I have not been on the property 30 minutes when I am lying on a massage table in a softly lit frangipani-scented room with a person named Trevor towering over me. I can see, Trevor says, that you are doing a lot of spiritual work because look how far you are out in your hair. His accent is vaguely South African and he has the most impressive unibrow I have ever seen. I do not read poetry, Trevor says, because I live poetry. He picks my feet up and lets them fall back to the table. May I ask you, he says, why the lower half of your body is perpetually standing in ice-cold water? He means energetically, of course, because the room is warm and my legs are dry. And what happened here, he asks, not waiting for an answer. He has his hand on my leg at the exact place where, when I was 4 years old, my father threw me so hard against a big oak wardrobe that I broke my femur. The bone healed 40 years ago. I was casted from the tip of my toes to my armpits for months, but Trevor is not the first healer to be able to see what happened. My father, I begin. I am not afraid of your pain, Trevor says. I am not afraid of your grief. I am not afraid of your terror. You want to know why I'm not afraid of your terror? I nod. I am not afraid of your terror because I have gone inside the monster, and inside the monster is pure wonder. Somewhere in this building, my friend Willow, who I have come to Canyon Ranch with, is getting a nice, simple lavender scrub and an herbal wrap. Willow looked through the catalog, thought, yeah, the first night, maybe a nice herbal wrap after all that travel. Pamela, Trevor says, will you tell me your father's name so that I may ask him to excuse himself from the lower half of your body? Yes, I say, and I do. Sebastian, Trevor says, Sebastian, you must get out of there. Sebastian, he says, this does not belong to you. He has his eyes closed tight and his hands around my ankles. No, Sebastian, he says more forcefully now, there are no options. We stay like that for an excruciating amount of time. Then he folds my hands across my chest and covers them with his. If you could have only one thing, he says, would you choose peace or ecstasy? Ecstasy, I think, though I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to say peace. Peace is an illusion, Trevor says. I am in the ecstasy nearly all the time now, even when I sleep. I think of the composer's lonely bedroom, the terrible black sheets, the clock radio projecting blood-red digits onto the ceiling, his bald head a glinting Cabernet color like somebody already dead, the musical he wrote where all the gorillas sang, despite what he is, he's alive. Pamela, Trevor says, slapping the bottom of my feet with his palms. Yes, sir, I say, out of habit. He's got my wrists now, is stretching them back over my head. No one has ever called me Pamela except my father. You have two glasses, Trevor says. One is completely full and one is completely empty. In which glass is stillness possible? The full one, I say. The questions are getting easier. Trevor now has his powerful thumbs wrapped almost completely around my uppermost vertebrae. You can get to stillness through ecstasy, he says, but you can't get to ecstasy through stillness. I think about all the ways the language of the New Age is custom made for terrorism. I think about when a pink mouth opened in a white sky over Davis, and I saw, for the second time, the cupped waiting hands. When one of the doing lines in your life intersects with the circle of your now, Trevor says, what happens? It has to bend, I say, confident now. It bends and eventually becomes a circle. Precisely, he says, and releases his death grip on my neck. This is 60, Istanbul, Turkey. At the Sultan's palace, beautiful long-limbed girl, sexy but not too sexy, lots of brassy hair, surrounded by 7 or 8 international travelers her age. To an Australian boy with acne scars, she says, "You are walking through the Topkapi Palace with 3 beautiful women. What more do you want?" The other young women are not in the same room of beautiful as she, but they accept the compliment, don't dare to interrupt. The boy says, "Maybe if you were all naked," and laughs. One of the other girls, a Swede, says, "No," meaning, "Go fuck yourself, acne face." The brassy-haired girl holds her finger to the Swede's lips, says, "My parents taught me never to say no immediately." To men, the Swede asks. To anything, she says. Istanbul is the only major city in the world that is situated on 2 continents. Since 330 AD, it has been the capital of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Latin Empire, and as recently as 1922, the Ottoman Empire. In the hilly streets, ruin leans into palace, leans into internet cafe. We are in line waiting to get into the harem, miles of tiled, low-lit corridors and rooms so thick with the ghost of women in captivity you can feel their hair on your arm, their jasmine-scented breath on your face. In contemporary Istanbul, the dervishes have finally invited the women to whirl. In the Blue Mosque, there are 250,000 tiles the color of sky. When the sun comes out, inside is sky and outside is golden. I am 46 years old and ashamed of the fact that this is the first mosque of my life, but later, when the evening call to prayer catches me in the garden between the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia, call and echo, echo and answer, bouncing off domes and turrets that have stood on this hill for 1,500 years, I know faith springs out of doubt like topsoil, and one thing I am is here right now. Across the Golden Horn, where the Bosphorus meets the Sea of Marmara, the Asian part of the city glistens in twilight. As a candidate for the center of everything, Istanbul beats Pueblo, Colorado, hands down. The gulls are turning cartwheels around the towers of the Blue Mosque and cawing like crazy women. Byzantium, I say to them, Constantinople. The circle of my now is wreaking havoc with the lines of my doing. I am learning to say yes, if not always immediately. A sweet-faced Turkish boy, maybe 19, offers me a Kleenex, puts both hands over his heart when I take it, says I look just like his mother when I cry. This is 97, Gunnison, Colorado. Just make sure I'm going in order here. New Year's Day up the Taylor Fork. The fortuitously named Becky Barkman sits comfortably in the sled while I drive her 10-dog team through the 6 inches of new snow that sit on top of the 2 feet they got in December. I've decided to get rid of the horses, she says, legs stretched in front of her, Tessa, a blue heeler who does not pull, sitting on her lap. I've had them for 20 years and decided they're pushy, insolent, greedy. Even the good ones, when it comes down to it, are all about the food. By my best calculations, I have not seen Becky Barkman for 17 years, although technically, with her down and Mylar all-in-one suit, her fur-rimmed hood, and her wraparound glasses, I am not exactly seeing her now. We have picked up a conversation we must have been having 17 years ago. Disappointing men, overachieving dogs, cutting your own wood and hauling your own hay, and living a life held together with paper and string. But how many people get to do this today? It's not that there's anything wrong with the horses, Becky says. They simply don't give back. She is talking herself into this, I suspect, because in this recession, something's got to go, and if it's not the horses, it's some or all of the 25 dogs who are giving back and giving back with all their little hearts, even as we have this conversation. You might say, come on, how can you ask a horse to give back? But if we are talking energetically, I think you know what I mean. Uh-huh, I say, because I do, more or less, and as far as I'm concerned, Becky can talk about anything she wants to all day, as long as she lets me drive. Because driving a dog team, whipping down a snowy path at 15 miles per hour through the silent woods behind 10 joyful, hardworking canines I remember each time I get to do it, is the thing that makes me happier than anything else on earth. Driving the other sled, the one where Rick and Madison are riding, is a crazy, handsome, soft-spoken, and kind man named Matt, who works for Becky, and who is taking a lot of care teaching Madison the names of the dogs, letting her stand in front of him on the runners, giving her the feel of what it's like to drive the sled. Madison has the best intuitive sense of how to be around animals of any child I have ever known. I bought her this trip for Christmas to encourage her toward her interest in animals and away from both her parents' dream of her being a singing star, for which she also shows a lot of talent. It's none of my business, as I'm finding out daily. When you are a step-parent, nothing that really matters is any of your business. But when I look down the road of her future to the fork, I prefer Joy Adamson to Janis Joplin, Diane Fossey to Britney Spears. Now Becky is talking about the age of Aquarius and Mercury dropping down into alignment at last, and I am watching the ice crystals fall from the trees and shifting my weight from rudder to stay in the middle of the narrow trail and smiling back at the dogs who turn now and then to smile at me. How we doing? How we doing? They seem to say, and hearing the whisper of the runners in the new snow and easing my weight onto the drag brake for the steep downhills and jumping off and trotting beside the sled on the uphills and thinking, if the age of Aquarius has made it all the way to Gunnison, that's the best evidence I've heard that it's really real. Thanks. This is 111, Trenton, New Jersey. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that my back hurts so much because when I was 4 and in my 3/4 body cast, my mother found it easier to carry me around upside down, like a monkey, using the plaster bar the doctors had fashioned between my knees to keep them for 3.5 months, the correct distance apart. And let's say she did just that, until my second to last appointment when the orthopedic surgeon said, "You haven't been carrying her around by this bar, have you?" And my mother shot one quick glance at my father and said, "Of course not, no." And it became a funny story the two of them liked to tell together to friends over a couple of drinks. And let's say that when their friends asked, as of course they would, how in the name of heaven a 4-year-old breaks her femur, they said that I had somehow managed to pull the giant wardrobe over onto myself, except instead of wardrobe, they would have said credenza, because it would have made us sound richer than we were. I still don't see how it would make me feel any better to think of the pain in my hip and spine as anything other than my most loyal and valuable companion, the continuous non-voice in my ear that says, "You got out alive and you still get to go." No two people who have ever lived love to travel more than my mother and father. They gave that love in their fashion to me. This is another airplane story. This is N5. This is a tiny airplane, so it's just named with the tail number of the airplane. N577WA. I am flying out of the Little Delta drainage, tucked illegally into the luggage area of George White's converted Super Cub. Converted, that is, to haul gear instead of a passenger. It is not that my presence puts us in danger, George assures me. I am well within the aircraft's specs, weighing, as I do, significantly less than a boned-out moose or caribou. But there is no seat for me, not to mention a belt, so my instructions are to make myself look like a duffel bag when we land in Fairbanks and wait for the all clear from George before I untangle my limbs and crawl over his seat to the door. George is one of many pilots who found their way to Alaska more or less straight from Vietnam. I once saw him break a 9-year-old boy's arm at the dinner table right after the boy, in an attempt to get his mother's attention, put the tines of his fork through the back of her hand. I have also watched him dig through buckets of rusted nuts and bolts to find the one ancient screw that will restart a seemingly defunct airplane engine. He likes to push both the light and the equipment, landing on airstrips made of nothing but river rock between steep canyon walls deep into the Alaskan twilight. George uses a great deal of duct tape. He has gone down 3 times because of some combination of weather and equipment failure, and he has walked away each time, once for 75 miles before he hit the nearest road. His brother, who I flew with out on the coast from Dry Bay to Yakutat, the clouds forcing us so low that we could feel the spray from the breakers on the bottom of the aircraft, so low that we could watch the brown bears chasing each other off the wild strawberry patches on the beaches, had not been so lucky. His death slowed down George's adrenaline-seeking tendencies, not one iota. Normally, George flies me in and out of the backcountry in the mall, his newest and safest plane, the only one licensed, in fact, for commercial passengers. But today the mall is down, and so I am in the back of the ancient but trusty Cub, my knees up around my ears as the wheels leave the rocky runway. It is only about a 45-minute flight back to Fairbanks, where in winter, pilots have to call ahead and ask the luggage handlers to chase moose off the runway. But this is September, and the tundra is red and golden below us, giving way as we head down valley to dense forest, an occasional moose standing in a little tarn carved out long ago by the glaciers. We have seen 5 big bulls since we became airborne. We are about halfway to Fairbanks when the engine sputters and quits. And George's hand jerks up to the tank control, and then his shoulders slump, and he says, "Shit," and I say, "What?" And he says, "What do you think? We're out of gas." What scares me more than anything is the violence with which he jerked his hand. For 10 or 20 seconds, we ride in the very particular silence of a small plane gradually losing altitude. And then George says, "Do you remember, like in the last few minutes, any place we could maybe put this thing down? A lake, a dirt road, even a river?" What I remember from the last few minutes are a few tiny glacial tarns and a million frost-heaved spruce trees pointing drunkenly in every direction. "I don't," I say. "Here," he says, shoving the open aviation chart over the seat back toward me. "We're somewhere around in here," he indicates vaguely with his finger. "See if you can see anything up ahead, even a cut for a power line. Sometimes those are wide enough." I try to make sense of the map fast, try to ignore the fact that the treetops are getting closer. "It looks like there's some kind of dwelling to the north," I say, "with a little road coming into it," and he says, "How far?" And I say, 4 or 5 miles, and he says, "I don't think we can make that." I know plenty about the need to be airborne, and plenty about how raising the degree of difficulty sweetens the pot. I understand why Alaska, and why fly in only Alaska, and why even that isn't far out enough. I know what it's like to feel calmer, better, face-to-face with a female grizz at dusk on a caribou trail than when I'm contemplating, say, a year or a month or even a week in the significant comforts of my very own home. I know all about the anatomy of restlessness and the crossover point of adrenaline addiction, but I'm not quite ready to be accessory to George's own personal death wish, even so. Can't hurt to try, I say. By my best guess, we are now less than 2,000 feet above the treetops. "Well," he says, "there is one other thing we could do." And I say, "What's that?" And he says, "Switch to the reserve fuel tank." And with that, he raises his hand to the little lever, switches it to left, points the nose slightly downward, and the single engine sputters back to life. 116, Corrales, New Mexico. Walking in the bosque with Haley and Ripley, sandhill cranes in every farmer's field. Last night we took the train with the Roadrunner on its nose up to Ristra and had one of those dinners where it was all so good and kept getting better, tuna tartare and butternut squash soup, and we talked and laughed like people on the Lowenbrow commercials I used to see when I was a kid in my angry little family and wonder who were these people who got to have a life like that. Haley left her scarf, which has major sentimental value, at the restaurant, so she made a run for it only 9 minutes before the last train. When Practical Karen told the conductor Haley would be back in a flash, he said, "I sure don't like to be late." But then a transvestite who was just getting off work at World Imports picked Haley up at the far end of the parking lot and drove her back to the train platform with 2 minutes to spare, which is just one of the many reasons it comes as a shock to us this morning when Haley tells us she voted for John McCain. Sarah Palin, Rick says, caught, as he often is, between the urge toward politeness and disbelief. Does she hate transvestites, Haley says? I mean, specifically? When the girls all came to the ranch last summer, Mackenzie and Cinder both wore tight black turtlenecks and tight single ponytails and big gold hoop earrings. Mackenzie wore her miniskirt and cowboy boots even though there were no boys there to see her, and she always sat on the piano bench butt to butt with Cinder, and finally Willow took me aside and said, "Are those two sleeping together or what?" Rick says now that I finally really have him, I don't so much really want him, and if that's true, I'm the simplest kind of person on earth and the worst. In my 20s, I pretended I wanted a long-term relationship but just kept picking wolf men by mistake. In my 30s, I thought my marriage phobia was something chronic I needed to get cured of, like back pain or herpes. But now that I'm almost 50, I suspect freedom is the secret pleasure girls born in the 60s won't fess up to. What if Janice was wrong, and it's actually a whole lot better to be free? Driving over Slumgullion Pass at dawn, listening to Ashes of American Flags at volume 50, watching 200 elk gallop chest deep through the new snow, all my lies are only wishes. When Madison shouts Pam Pam and leaps off the stage into my arms in her lion cub costume, her face all painted with a button nose and whiskers, I think, I cannot save her from her suffering. Nor is it true that nothing I do will make any difference in the end. This is 130, Forest Grove, Oregon. In my dorm room, there is a sign over the toilet that says, "Harvested rainwater, please do not drink." And the whole phrase is in quotation marks. When I get up to the residency, Madison calls to tell me she set my place at the ranch kitchen table and made a silhouette of me to put in my chair while they ate. The first day I ever met Madison, she took me up to her room and told me we were going to put on a play. I was to puppet half of her stuffed toys, including a bunny, a horse, and an extra large, hideously ugly human doll called Sister. And she would puppet 2 dogs and an elephant dressed as a bumblebee. The plot was based roughly on SpongeBob SquarePants, a show I had heard of but never seen. I would make each of my toys order either a Krabby Patty or a hamburger, and her toys would serve me. Each character was to have at least 3 different names and voices, so it seemed like lots of people were ordering. After 2 dress rehearsals, we performed it for Rick. I was so far outside of my comfort zone that day, it still makes my stomach turn over 3 years later. But I ordered and reordered Krabby Patties before I had any idea what they were. I would lie down in front of a car for her, I tell Dorianne, over the college cafeteria lunch, which generally sucks but always includes cake, red velvet, angel food, German chocolate. And Dorianne says about her own daughter, "I would live on 1 saltine and a thimbleful of water for a month if it would take away her pain." If I were a young poet, I would have woken up this morning and written a poem called Barry Lopez, Full Moon, Dairy Queen. When we popped out from under the campus redwoods on the way to get peanut butter parfaits and saw it, huge and yellow, rising over fields of strawberry and mustard, Deborah said, "Look, Barry," even though I was driving and Rachel was in the back seat too, and it begged the question, could we even see the moon as he did? And the answer is probably not. At the reading last night, Kwame said, "Whenever people say to me, 'I can't imagine what you were going through,' I say, 'Well, work on it.'" I didn't trust it at first, the way Madison and I fell for each other. "You don't even like kids," she likes to say now, flirtatious as hell. And this is the last airplane story in the book. This is TG, which is Thai Air 944. Once upon a time, I decided to take Ethan around the world. It was probably an ill-advised decision. Let's just say that when I saw the email to his 3rd most important other girlfriend 2 weeks before we left, the one that said, "Pam is dangling this round-the-world trip like the proverbial carrot at the end of the fishing pole," I wished I had my $14,700 back. We went to Paris, Bangkok, Bhutan, Perth, Alice Springs, and Sydney, and I suspect that in reality, it was a pretty wretched trip. The betrayals revealed, the breakup imminent. There was likely some screaming and crying. No doubt tensions were high. But here's what I remember. The little boy pouring himself a shower from a bucket in the labyrinthine canals of Bangkok. The sign in a cafe window in Geraldton that said, "Lost, kangaroo, beloved pet and dog's best friend," and a number to call should the kangaroo be discovered. The middle-aged Italians singing "Happy Birthday to Me" on the airport bus at Uluru. Ethan's smile, backlit by the sun coming through hundreds of white prayer flags on top of the Da Chula in Bhutan. Also this pleasure, flying over the part of the globe I had not flown over before. I had flown west to Asia, east to Europe and Africa, but everything east of Germany, everything west of India, was in my imagination a big blank space. The Thai Air 747 from Frankfurt to Bangkok traveled mostly at night, but there was a nearly full moon and snow in the mountains. According to the computerized route map, we would fly over Moldavia, Ukraine, Russia, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. I stayed up all night while Ethan slept, knowing that though life is long and every time I get $10 ahead, I go somewhere, this was still the best view I would ever get of many of these countries. Afghanistan was mostly snow-covered, treeless mountain ranges dotted with occasional flashes of red, possibly infrared light. I am 39,000 feet above a war, I thought, the closest I've been in my lifetime. These days, Rick wonders aloud if I will ever grow up enough to realize that everything I'm searching for on the other side of the world I could find just as well at my own kitchen table. Maybe someday, I say cheerfully, except that I can't. Sophie told Madison she doesn't like to fly, the she, of course, being Madison. And when Madison reports the conversation to me, I say, do too, and she says, do not, and I say, do too, and she says, do not, and I say, do too, and then we tickle each other. Last week she said, I don't know what all I got from my mother, but what I got from you is not to be grossed out by things. Madison will be 9 years old next Saturday, which means I have known her for exactly 1/3 of her life. We get her from Sophie for 24 hours at 5 o'clock, and we are taking the Amtrak up to Winter Park to play mini golf and ride the Alpine Slide, which I realize is not exactly the Orient Express, but it's something. I think about the places left to go: Mongolia, Namibia, Sri Lanka, Yemen, and have grown up enough to realize it will be good not to get to all of them. Also to recognize the 2 long straws I drew in the psyche lottery. I have no memory for the really bad stuff, and I've never quite understood shame. The first time I saw the earth get made, cool from lava to black glass to something called Hawaii, I didn't think I would cry, but I was mistaken. Eventually, on that long night over the parts of the globe I'll never see, the sun rose over Myanmar, and in Rangoon, where the Yangon River meets the Andaman Sea, the turrets and domes of the temples lit up as soft and gold in the early light as a fairy tale. Thanks.